Welcome to Modern Latin America in 15 minutes. My name is Dr. Kim Richardson, and today we are only going to discuss very briefly nationalism through art. This was meant to be part of the nationalism discussion, but because of lack of time, I put this as a standalone project. This particular picture is one that when I was in Recife, the North Sea of Brazil, I purchased there, and it's just a watercolor, nothing fancy, but you can see here it is all about the city here and the people working to put things on the boats. Now, it's supposed to be an idyllic version of the 19th century, but you can kind of see that the subject of this art is Afro-Brazilians, right? And that's kind of the theme of what we're talking about here. If we look at Mexico, 1910 to 1920, there's a great revolution, the Revolutionary War. Afterwards, what was this war fought over? Over 1 million people died. And a lot of people said, why did we fight? And that's going to be after every single war. Well, the government decided to hire 3 great muralists in order to paint everywhere to demonstrate to the people why we fought. Diego Rivera, Jose Clemente Orozco, and David Afro Siqueiros. So these are the 3 great muralists that everybody should know. This first of the great muralists is Diego Rivera. He is perhaps the best. Either way, he's my favorite. And he's going to be married to the famous Frida Kahlo. And she in herself, if you ever get a chance to look at her artwork, is a great, great addition to this whole section. But we're talking about muralists, and she was not a muralist, but she was an excellent painter. Anyway, Diego Rivera was a cubist in Europe, came back to Mexico under the guidance of the Minister of Education, who was Jose Vasconcelos. Jose Vasconcelos wanted to teach people why we fought the Mexican Revolution, but also, if you remember, he had this idea from this book that he wrote called La Raza Cósmica, the cosmic race. The Mexican is the cosmic race. That means that the Mexican is the mestizo, the combination of the European and the Indian, right? So if we look here, and I got these pictures from wherever I could find them, right? Because sometimes it's very difficult to get these pictures, right, where you can put them on a slideshow. Nonetheless, this is Diego Rivera's Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, 1923 to 24. And if you look here, there are no kings or queens or viceroys, there are normal, everyday people, right? This is at decorating the court of the fiestas at Mexico's Ministry of Education. So if you look at it, you go to the Ministry of Education, and on the outside you can see, wow, there are all these paintings. And then the whole goal is to have people say, what is that about? And somebody standing next to them say, well, this is what I understand it to be. And somebody else saying, no, this is what I understand it to be. What they're going to start doing is talking, asking questions. In these cases, the questions are more important than the answers. This here is Emiliano Zapata. Zapata, if you remember, wanted land reform. So if before we said the Mexican Revolution was fought for the Mexican, now it's going to be fought, what? For land reform. We want to have, land reform, right? Land reform is one of the key things that's going to be outlined in the Constitution of 1917. The average Mexican, what do you think Diego Rivera was trying to teach us here in this piece of artwork? I don't know. Perhaps the Mexican is being weighed down with flowers. Perhaps it's something else. Again, it's the question, not the answer, that we want to focus on. Who is in this picture here, this painting? Well, it's going to be indigenous peoples, the Aztecs. We are, said the artist, a descendant of the Aztecs and the Europeans. Not just Aztecs, of course, but, we're descendants of all sorts of peoples. We are the La Raza Cósmica. He was so famous, he actually was invited to come up to Detroit, Michigan to paint there as well. And so you can see here in the United States some great paintings by Diego Rivera. He is the first of the great muralists. The second is Jose Clemente Orozco. PBS has a great series on him. If you wanted to go look at their gallery, it's very, very good. Well, some of the best paintings is this one here, called Zapata 1930. Who was Zapata once again? Evidently, more than one person believed that Zapata and the land reform policies were a key issue with the Mexican Revolution. So people will start talking about this, right? And it becomes important. Now, it's not just land reform, it's education reform that is a key issue of the revolution. And this particular mural painted over this store here, you can see that education reform is key to why the revolution was fought. It might take some birth pangs, but it's going to be important in the future of Mexico and Latin America. Father Hidalgo, why did he lead this so-called independence movement in 1810? Who was he? We start talking about him as a result of this artwork that's being spread. The third great muralist is going to be David Alfaro Siqueiros. Siqueiros, then, you could see the causes of the revolution demonstrated. This particular painting is one of my favorites, right? Demonstrating the last of the Aztec emperors, Cuauhtemoc, his feet being burned. And it was being burned at this time because they thought that the conquistadores thought that he knew where more gold and silver and jewels were. He didn't, but his feet were burned. He wasn't able to give it up. He wasn't killed yet, but he would be killed later on. But I think it's a great depiction. It's showing for the first time the Europeans in not a very positive light, right? So sometimes we look at our past and say, listen, we should recognize our past, even if sometimes our past is not very good. You know, the famous arrival of Quetzalcoatl. Now, Quetzalcoatl was mythically the person who said that he fled to the east during the before the conquest, so pre-Columbian times. He fled to the east and he said, I'm going to return to the Valley of Mexico to reclaim my throne in the year 1 Reed, which is 1519. Whether or not that really happened or not is doubtful, but still, the arrival of Quetzalcoatl, or perhaps this is going back even farther to an arrival of Quetzalcoatl, him being sacrificed so that the planets or whatever can be restored. I don't know. See, the question again is why I like these. This one here is actually, I used to use a textbook that had this right on the cover of it, which was great, a depiction. And here you got, again, perhaps the most famous of all the murals, paintings that is, here. You got the average soldier, you got the women that accompanied them, you don't have anybody on horseback, the Mexican Revolution is fought for people. So there were three great muralists that painted during, after, but for the revolution. Why did we fight the revolution? And the whole point is, if you look at all this art, is that they were fought for land reform, labor reform, and education reform. And so then, even if you're illiterate, you could understand what's going on. What about the rest of Latin America? Well, it's a little bit more difficult in the time remaining. What happens to the rest of Latin America is something called indigenismo, indigenousness, right? Whereas now we got people such as Cándido Portinari, the coffee grower. For the first time ever, we're saying, who are we? Again, just like in Mexico, right? Here is Afro-Brazilian, and he's working in the coffee fields. In the background, you see progress in the form of a train. Just an awesome painting demonstrating many of these same issues in Brazil as in the rest of Latin America, but in particular Mexico. This is one of the most famous paintings of his. You can see in the background more fields, buildings, and then he had this muscular Brazilian. Lots of these paintings are still on display throughout the world, just great, great paintings. So what I'm trying to get at with all of this, instead of trying to cover all 15 minutes, is just to say, listen, revolutionary art is a great way in which the revolutions and these reform movements or revolutionary movements later on are going to be spread. And you have to know the three great muralists. And if you go into any great building in the American Southwest, whether it be a restaurant or a museum, you should see one or two or more of these great paintings. It's important. Okay, so hopefully what you got from this is that there were three great muralists in Mexico. And these three great muralists were trying to spread to the masses why the revolution was fought. And the revolution was fought for land reform, labor reform, and education reform. I only put the Brazilian examples here as well to demonstrate what we don't have time to discuss, which is all of Latin America has a great tradition now of art. Not only art though, but the art demonstrate the new nationalism that is coming about. The economic, the political, the cultural nationalism. This is going to be important as we progress throughout the 20th century. Alright, so this is Modern Latin America in 15 minutes.